Welcome to my channel, Veteran's Legacy. Tonight, I'm taking you into a story that begins with suspicion, humiliation, and a pair of cold steel handcuffs. And ends with the kind of revelation that echoes across generations. Settle in, turn up the volume, because this one is going to hit deep. The old man sat alone in the small town diner, stirring a cup of coffee he'd barely touched. His hair was silver, not the soft, gentle silver of peaceful old age, but the rugged, battle-etched gray of a man who had seen things no camera could ever capture and no metal could ever reflect. His name, at least the one he went by these days, was Thomas Hale. Nobody in that quiet roadside diner knew much about him. He lived in a run-down RV parked behind Miller's Hardware, kept mostly to himself, and nodded politely to anyone who bothered to acknowledge him. But on this cold November morning, 3 young deputies stepped through the diner door. And everything changed. Thomas Hale, the first deputy, said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "You're under arrest for impersonating a Navy SEAL." A couple of diners gasped. Others stared. The waitress, a woman in her 60s who always made sure Thomas had extra creamer, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Thomas didn't move, didn't argue. He simply looked up, his weathered eyes tired but calm, as if this moment was just another storm he'd already lived through. The youngest deputy snapped the cuffs on. "You know the stolen Valor Act isn't a joke, old man," he said, his voice sharp with contempt. "You embarrassed the town council last week, saying you were on Team 3, saying you fought in classified operations. You think it's funny pretending to be something you're not." Thomas didn't answer. He'd learned decades ago that silence could be stronger than any defense. They marched him out of the diner, the door chiming softly behind them, and loaded him into the back of the cruiser. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet, slow, almost respectful. Back at the sheriff's office, the deputies shoved him into a chair, still handcuffed. Sheriff Dalton, a stout, grizzled man with a permanent look of suspicion, tossed a stack of printed screenshots onto the desk. "You told a group of high school kids last week that you were deployed in Black Sea operations in 1983 under a Vice Admiral who doesn't exist in any public record," Dalton said. "Then you claimed you're not listed because your missions were sealed. Please, we've seen this 100 times." Thomas raised his eyes slowly. "I didn't claim," he said quietly. "They asked. I answered." "Oh, so now you're some kind of ghost warrior, huh?" One deputy scoffed. The sheriff continued. "Funny thing, though. The only Thomas Hale the Navy ever recorded served 4 years as a logistics clerk. That's it. No SEAL training, no deployments, nothing." Thomas blinked once. "I know the Thomas Hale you're talking about. That's not me." The deputies exchanged confused glances. Sheriff Dalton folded his arms. "If that's not you, then who are you?" Thomas took a slow breath. "Someone who's tired," he whispered. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then the sheriff stepped behind him. "Let's see what else you're hiding." He reached for the old man's jacket to frisk him properly. As the jacket slid off Thomas's shoulder, part of his upper arm became visible. And everything stopped. The youngest deputy's flashlight froze mid-motion. Sheriff Dalton leaned in, squinting. It wasn't a tattoo most people would recognize. It wasn't flashy, wasn't artistic. It was plain, ink faded by saltwater, sun, and time. A small, tight emblem. A trident, a dagger, a flintlock pistol, the original unit mark of one of the earliest Navy SEAL teams. A design that had been retired decades ago, and only ever worn by men whose missions would never be publicly acknowledged. Dalton swallowed. "No way," he whispered. But before he could say anything else, the office door swung open. The person who walked in wasn't from the sheriff's department. He wasn't from the local council. And judging by the way he filled the room with presence alone, he wasn't someone you ignored. He wore navy dress blues, heavy ribbons, and silver stars on his shoulders. "Vice Admiral Jonathan Pierce," he said, handing his credentials to the sheriff. "I'm here for Mr. Hale." The deputies stiffened. Dalton's face turned pale. Admiral Pierce walked straight to Thomas, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, sir," the admiral said softly. "They shouldn't have treated you this way." Thomas nodded once. "It's not their fault. They only know what they're allowed to know." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, voice trembling. Admiral, is he really? Pierce turned his gaze to the sheriff. Thomas Hale is one of the finest men I ever served with. He's a legend in special warfare circles. Half the operations you read about in history books only succeeded because of the groundwork his team laid in the shadows. The room went silent again. This time with awe. The youngest deputy's face flushed with shame. We thought he was lying, he whispered. Pierce shook his head. That's the thing about men like him. They don't talk about what they did. Because they can't. And because they carry more ghosts than medals. The Admiral helped Thomas to his feet. Come on, old friend. Let's get you out of here. But Thomas didn't move toward the door. Instead, he turned back to the deputies. I understand why you doubted me, he said quietly. Men have lied about being SEALs for years. But the ones who served, the real ones, would rather cut out their own tongue than glorify themselves. His voice cracked slightly. You don't know what it costs. What it takes. What it leaves behind. No one responded. No one dared. Thomas turned again. But this time, the Admiral gently touched his arm. Tell them, Pierce said softly. Thomas looked surprised, but after a long pause, he nodded. He eased himself down into the chair again. When I was 22, Thomas began, I joined Task Unit Echo under a program that no longer exists. We operated in places where our country could never officially be. We went in with no flags, no identity, and no guarantee of coming back. The deputies listened, breath held. We lost 19 men in one operation alone, Thomas whispered. 19. We were sent into a hostile harbor to extract hostages. The intel was wrong. Everything went bad. We completed the mission, but... He swallowed, his voice breaking. I was the last one out. They put me in for a medal I never accepted. Because medals don't cover the things you see when the sun comes up the next day. The room felt heavier than the world itself. He continued. When I retired, they gave me a new identity. Wiped my records. I was supposed to go live quietly, far from the noise. He smiled sadly. Never thought living quietly would include being arrested in a diner. Even Sheriff Dalton cracked a small, guilty smile. Admiral Pierce stepped forward. Mr. Hale served this country in ways most Americans will never understand. And he was here because he wanted to reconnect with the family of one of his fallen teammates. The town council mocked him when he asked for contact records. Thomas added quietly, I wasn't trying to brag. I was trying to say goodbye. The entire office felt a shift. From suspicion, to remorse, to something reverent. Dalton approached the old man slowly. I'm sorry, he said. We didn't know. Thomas touched the sheriff's arm gently. That's the point, he said. You weren't supposed to know. Pierce turned to the deputies. Men like him disappear into the world. They live in tiny towns, in RVs, in quiet neighborhoods. They carry secrets you'll never hear and scars you'll never see. His voice softened. Next time you meet an old veteran, don't judge the boots, or the jacket, or the stories. Some of America's greatest warriors walk among you like ordinary shadows. They escorted Thomas out of the station. But this time with honor. The waitress from the diner rushed over, tears in her eyes, and hugged him tightly. Word spread fast. Within the hour, dozens of townspeople gathered around him. Not gawking, not questioning, just thanking him. A little boy approached shyly, holding a small American flag. Sir, are you really a hero? He asked. Thomas knelt slowly, wincing at the pain in his knees, and touched the boy's shoulder. Heroes, he said softly, are the ones who never came home. The boy nodded, eyes bright. Admiral Pierce stood nearby, watching the moment with deep respect. Come home with us, Tom, he finally said. You don't need to be alone anymore. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. Then smiled. Yeah, he whispered. I think I'd like that. As the Admiral helped him into the black sedan waiting near the curb, snow continued to fall. Gentle, quiet, almost like honor descending from the sky. And for the first time in decades, Thomas Hale felt something he had forgotten he was capable of feeling. Peace.